for the New Christian Intellectual. This time we are talking about criticizing conservatives and what both Jacob Brunton and I, Cody Libolt, have learned in the last month happens when you criticize conservatives. Now, we criticize people left and right depending on whether we think they're right or wrong. It reminds me of Ben Shapiro, where he says, well, there's good Trump and there's bad Trump. I'm going to tell the truth. I'm going to call it like I see it. But that is not how partisans act. That is not how people in the conservative movement want us to act. And it happened with Jacob Brunton when he criticized Tom Ascol, Tom Ascol of Founders Ministries. Jacob, can you summarize that?
Conservative Resurgence Voices, which is a publication run by Chris Bolt and Jeff Wright, they released an email from Paul Chitwood. Dr. Paul Chitwood is the president of the International Mission Board. And in that email, he was promoting various aspects of what we would call woke ideology. And it's widely acknowledged as such, including diversity training and cultural sensitivity training, things like that. Hiring practices that are aimed at specifically hiring minorities, special groups for minorities, all kinds of stuff like that. And the language of the email itself was just replete with all kinds of obviously woke ideology and sentiments. Tom Ascol retweeted that saying this needs to be addressed. That's all he said. He didn't condemn it or anything. He just, this needs to be addressed. And of course, that got people's attention. And so people were rightly criticizing the IMB for this foray into woke ideology. And in it, they say that they started these programs back in June after the death of George Floyd. They cite that as the reason, the impetus for this, and that they had been working through these things since then, right? So this had been going on at the IMB for at least a couple months. And so, all this outrage comes out. And then all of a sudden, Tom Ascol announces on Twitter that he had a personal phone call with Dr. Chitwood, and all of his concerns have been allayed because Dr. Chitwood has said that the IMB no longer uses that language, recognizing that the language is problematic. He doesn't say which language. He doesn't say why it's problematic. And he doesn't say that they've stopped any of those programs other than the cultural sensitivity training. But the hiring practices, the special minority-only teams within the IMB leadership, all of those things, they don't say whether they've stopped that. They don't say why they stopped the things that they stopped. So they didn't repent. They didn't retract anything. At the very most, they stopped one aspect that was highly objectionable, but continued with the other aspects as far as we can tell. But Ascol wanted to calm people's fears and basically assure people, hey, everything's fine at the IMB now. And this was similar to what Ascol did about a year prior with Matt Hall. In fact, it was almost exactly a year prior that Matt Hall was embroiled in a lot of controversy. Matt Hall is the provost of Southern Seminary, right under Al Mohler. He was embroiled in all kinds of controversy because of the video clips that had been released and the various articles that had been released where he was also advocating various aspects of woke ideology and critical race theory. And Ascol had raised concerns, just like with Paul Chitwood. And just like with Paul Chitwood, Ascol had announced on Twitter that he had a personal private phone call with Matt Hall and that he was assuring everybody that Matt Hall denounces CRT and rejects CRT and that, everything's fine. But the problem is, again, Hall didn't publicly denounce any of the things that he actually said. He didn't retract anything he actually said. He didn't repent of anything he actually said. He just said, I reject CRT, just the label CRT. And that wasn't the issue. The issue is, okay, but the things that you've taught are critical race theory. Do you reject those specific things that you've taught? Or do you agree that those things were critical race theory? And with Ascol proclaiming to the world that Matt Hall rejected CRT and basically everything's fine, he's basically saying to conservatives, stop attacking Matt Hall. Everything's fine now. It's as if he's repented. It's as if nothing's wrong. Same thing with Paul Chitwood in the IMB. When Ascol, a conservative, who's supposed to be the conservative opposition, right? He's supposed to be the guy fighting CRT harder than anybody else. That's his brand. And so when he gets up and he says, don't worry about Southern Baptist Seminary, Matt Hall, don't worry about the International Mission Board and Paul Chitwood, that tells all conservatives who were following him, okay, everything's fine. Even though it's not fine. It's obviously not fine. And so I was criticizing Tom Ascol for that, because I was saying, once again, Tom Ascol is helping woke leaders save face. Once again, he's helping them to pretend that they aren't pushing the dangerous ideologies that they actually are pushing. And I didn't mention anything about his motives. I don't know what his motives are. I can guess at them, but that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter why Ascol was doing it. The point is he did it. And that got a lot of conservatives very angry at me. The fact that I would dare to criticize Tom Ascol for helping these woke leaders to save face.
The response from the people that, that didn't like what you said about Tom Ascol seemed to be, how can you dare say that? Don't you realize the consequences of you saying that? I thought that was interesting, because the first question that you should ask when somebody says something is, what is true? What is right? Not who is right, or how does this affect me or other people that I'm close to, or that I consider to be useful to me, or toward the certain cause that I believe in, my tribe or whatever. The question is what is true. And whenever people criticized you, that was your style of responding, was to say, well, let's talk about what's true. But how did that go for you?
Not well. I mean, I'm fine. They didn't hurt me or hurt my feelings or anything. But no, it didn't go well in the minds of other people. I was called a fruitcake by Pastor Gabe Hughes, I think it is. He's pretty prominent conservative on Twitter. I was told to sit down by some other mid-level conservative guy. What was it? Regular Reform guys. What did he say? He said something else derogatory. So there were a number of fairly prominent conservative guys who were really angry at me for saying what I said, but none of them would interact with me about the reasons why they were upset. And it was because I'm not reading their minds here. I'm guessing. I'm fairly confident it was because they didn't have an answer. They didn't have a legitimate answer for why they were mad at me that they were willing to say publicly, because they knew that the answer would have to be something embarrassing, like, well, yeah, it's true, but why say what's true? And I think they know it, right? One of them, I think it's a combination of that and them deluding themselves, because one of them said, stop punching right. I was like, are you kidding me? I'm criticizing Ascol for telling us not to punch left, right? So Matt Hall is obviously to the left. Paul Chitwood, apart from any sort of public repentance or recantation, seems like he's pretty obviously to the left, or at least he was toying with it. I want to punch them, not them physically. I mean, I want to punch their brand. I want to punch their reputation, because they need to be criticized for that, right? I want to punch in that direction. That's left. That's me punching leftward. And Tom Ascol's coming and putting himself as a barrier between me and others in order to protect Matt Hall and Paul Chitwood. And you're telling me that I'm punching right? No. I'm punching left. And like I said on Twitter, I think I'm always going to punch left. And if your favorite conservative leader happens to be to the left of me, not my fault.
That phrase of punching right or punching left, it's a strategy that people use. And the whole purpose of it is, let's say that you're a strong leftist, very, very strong radical leftist. And then there's somebody like Hillary Clinton that comes along, or Joe Biden, that is just kind of a compromiser with you, but not necessarily fully on board. The point there is they generally are in sympathy with that radical position, or they generally want the country to move more toward that radical position than it is now. And so they're going to avoid ridiculing the people that hold that radical position. They're going to temporarily avoid doing it, because if you do that, then you start a battle in your own house, so to speak. And a house divided against itself will not stand. But the point is of that principle, And it's a useful principle for leftists or for rightists. It's useful either way. The point is, if there's somebody that's further out on the extremes and you're more in the middle, you ought not to be punching toward the people that are more extreme on your side, because that's a waste of energy. Why not direct your energy toward the side that you're really trying to conquer right now, that you consider to be the worst threat right now? It's an issue of priorities. But this principle doesn't mean that somebody that's an extreme shouldn't ever call somebody that's a moderate a rhino or something like that. Oh, you're just a fake. That's not even what the expression means.
It's really the exact opposite. The reason the left continues to win the culture war is that they know that the extremists are supposed to criticize the moderates within their own party, and the moderates take that criticism and they use that criticism as the public excuse for, well, we have to move further left, right? So the leftists know the game. They know that the extremists move the Overton window over, and the moderates are there to gradually move in that same direction. On the right, especially among Christians, it's the exact opposite. The moderates are pulling against the extremists as hard as possible, trying to get the extremists to move more left, trying to get the extremists to calm down and be more moderate. And so, I mean, the on the right, you've got the moderates pulling and fighting against the extremists to get them to move more left. And on the left, you've got the moderates pulling and fighting to go further left. What do you think is going to happen? I mean, this isn't rocket science.
So this topic of criticizing people within your own camp, so to speak, this also happened to me. It was a couple years ago when John MacArthur announced that they were going to do ShepCon 2019, and they were inviting people like Ligon Duncan, who endorses the woke church Eric Mason book and who endorses Jamar Tisby, radical racist anti-Christian teachers. And then he was inviting Al Mohler. And I think that what happened was these people were invited, and then it came out to the forefront in the discussion just how much they had been appeasing people and bringing people in and platforming people, although they didn't themselves claim to have this radical woke critical race theory position. Duncan and Mohler shouldn't have been at ShepCon, because these people, given the choices that they had made by that time in 2019, they really shouldn't have been teaching pastors at all. They're not trustworthy. They shouldn't have been invited to a conference to speak to pastors. Now, I pointed this out on social media. I showed a picture of the conference lineup and I called it moral compromise. And you can imagine, a lot of people think that John MacArthur is really wonderful, and I think he's really wonderful. In fact, John MacArthur was one of the leading, probably the most prominent signer of the Statement on Social Justice. So what am I doing? What am I doing criticizing a conservative? Well, I'm doing the same thing that Jacob just did. I'm pointing out this is not good strategy. And in this case, I even think that it was a morally wrong decision. Now, I can say that somebody made a morally wrong decision at one time because their judgment was clouded, without saying we should no longer pay attention to John MacArthur. Oh, I love John MacArthur and what he stands for. It's just in this case, I think he made a morally wrong decision. And the kind of criticism that I received, it was just amazing. It was all the kind of criticism that you would expect from people who cannot make an argument. It was, oh, you're just being too hard line, or that's a low punch, or those kinds of things. But you try to engage them, and there would be no discussion of the actual issue at hand. Is it true? Is it true that these people should be speaking in front of pastors, or is it not true that these people should be? It was an impossible situation for me to try to reason with these people, and all I ended up doing eventually, in multiple threads, probably 4 or 5 different threads of people saying, "You're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong." I'll just point out, if you have an argument about the actual topic, I'd love to hear it. That's as far as you can go. It's a sad state of affairs, but I think that it points to the fact that people are feeling pretty desperate in the culture war. They're feeling desperate, like, hey, we cannot afford to be criticizing anybody that's on our side right now. Why is that wrong, though, Jacob?
One reason it's wrong is that like you just said, and as I explained, it's impractical. It's not going to work out, right? And this is the irony, that a lot of people will justify the sort of moderates on the basis of pragmatism. They'll accuse us of not being practical. You're being an idealist. You're being impractical. We need to just come together and ignore these types of differences for the common, our common goal here. But the irony is that no, that's not practical. It won't work, because that is a movement towards appeasing the left. It's not a movement in the right direction. It's compromise with the enemy. In fact, it helps the enemy pretend that the enemy is not your enemy, and that's not a winning strategy, right? I mean, what who in the world would say that it's practical to help your enemy pretend that they're not your enemy? That's the exact opposite of practical, right? That's shooting yourself in the foot in the most obvious way possible. But in addition to it being highly impractical, it's also morally wrong, and it demonstrates a really messed up view of morality and being principled, right? So when somebody gets mad at us for criticizing their conservative figurehead, and their criticism of us is you're not being conservative, you're just like those lefties criticizing our conservative figurehead. What they're confessing is that their idea of conservatism is based solely on the person, on their figurehead. Their idea of what's right and moral and just and good and the direction that we need to go, all of that is almost exclusively defined in a personality in their minds. So when you attack that personality, you're attacking the entire position, their entire worldview. Whereas, I mean, I would say that that's idolatrous and psychotic. Our view would say, no, you should have the ideal in your mind of where we want to go. What is right? What is just? What is good? What does conservatism look like? It's an idea that stands over and above all persons and personalities, to which some measure up more than others. And we should be calling everyone to pursue that ideal, that principle, as much as possible, and then be honest where each person falls short, including ourselves and including our favorite conservative leaders, right? So, and that's why I called my recent article Principles Over Personalities. The ironic thing is, Chris Bolt wrote this article criticizing discernment ministries. I suspected that he had me in mind. He says he didn't. I'll take him at his word. But the criticism was still that, these guys who are calling out conservatives like Ascol and Doug Wilson, they're insane, right? They want people to adhere to a personality rather than to some conservative principle. That was totally backwards, because he's functionally, and all of our critics are functionally treating Doug Wilson or Tom Ascol as the principle, right? So when you criticize them, you're being unprincipled. No, we're criticizing them based on an objective principle. And that's why we're able to stand back and say, it doesn't matter who the personality is. If they don't measure up to the principle that we should all be chasing, then they're subject to criticism. And that's not a bad, that's a very good thing. That makes us objective and committed to the truth rather than partisan and tribal.
It could have gone a whole different way. The other day when you started tweeting, you pressed hard and said Tom Ascol is mistaken about this. They need to handle it differently. And then people wanted to fight with you about it. And it's funny because the way it played out, every time somebody tried to argue with you about it, then you would say, well, no, here's the reasons why. And it would just go on and on and on. And it made this massive discussion about Tom Ascol's mistake. What could have happened instead is if people would have said, you know what, let me think about that. Seems like strategically you're right. It's poor strategy for Tom Ascol to say this. He ought to have made an issue about it. And then maybe they would, regardless of whether they come to agree with you or disagree with you, somebody else who's interested in this and engaged in this could simply say, I disagree with Jacob Brunton, but I understand that he is within his rights to have a criticism. I just don't agree with the criticism in this case. Or they could have said, I do agree with the criticism in this case. Tom Ascol seems to have made an error here, an important one. And they could have left it at that. And that would have been fine, because that's everybody making their own judgment. And there's no danger if, like, say 50 or 100 different conservatives that have somewhat of a Twitter presence within the Southern Baptist Convention were to go and say, I think Tom Ascol made an error, or I think he didn't make an error. It doesn't matter all that much, right? But what was scary is when you see people are not oriented toward deciding for themselves whether there was an error, but rather they're oriented to making sure that everybody stays in line.
Mm-hmm.
You got a whole bunch of people acting like sheepdogs, like running around the outside of the sheep, trying to, bite at them, say, you stay here, you stay here, you stay here. And they're not looking to see if there's a cliff nearby. It's a scary situation.
The annoying thing is that they want to very vocally denounce me for my criticism as if I'm wrong, as if I'm obviously and objectively wrong, but then they don't want to give any sort of reasons to back up their claims about me, to back up their denunciation of me. They want to declare to everybody, hey, Jacob's being lefty here, or Jacob's being divisive. Jacob is, such and such, fill in the blank. And then when you ask for any sort of substantiation, it's either obvious obfuscation and deflection, or just pure evasion, like just no answer, no reply. I mean, one of the guys falsely quoted things that I didn't say, and he put them in quotation marks. Like he said, Jacob Brunton says, in quotes, and then something, I think it was Tom Ascol is a woke sympathizer. And several people, including myself, said, I didn't say that, and linked to the article that he was referencing. And anybody could read it themselves to see, nope, nowhere did I say that. Nowhere did I even imply that. And over and over again, people kept asking, hey, why are you saying this? No response. He wouldn't even respond. He left it up. And Tom Ascol even liked it. Joel Ascol even liked it. I think Hannah Ascol liked it. Like, all the Ascols liked it. All the Ascol's followers liked it. This guy left it up, even though it was pointed out over and over and over and over and over again that it was a blatant lie. And so the concern that we have here is, I don't care if conservatives win this war, either the culture war or the war within the church, if conservatism is about blind, mindless, tribal personalities. Like, who cares? If conservatism is just as dismissive of what's true and what's right and what's principled as the left is, then who cares who wins?
I want to ask you, like, from the devil's advocate point of view, Jacob, what about the fact that this isn't the best time? Like, maybe you're right, maybe it is true, but just because something's true, does that mean that I need to say it? Does that mean that I need to say it right now and that I need to say it publicly?
Yeah, that's a good consideration to take into account. It's good to ask yourself, just because this is true, does that mean that it's good for me to say it right now in this context? And I would say, yes, absolutely. It was good and necessary for me to say it in the context, and it was necessary for more people to do so. And not enough people did, because the objectively right thing for Ascol to do, and for any conservative leader to do, is to not help their enemy pretend that they aren't their enemy. That is objectively bad, strategically and morally. It's just stupid. It's going to hurt everybody in the long run. And so if anybody's tempted to do that, right? If Tom Ascol's tempted to do that, if Doug Wilson's tempted to do that, if Owen Stratton is tempted to do that, if anybody is tempted to do what is objectively harmful and unwise and impractical, then it is good for many of us to put public pressure on them to do what is good, rather than the evil thing that they're tempted to do.
So, what about this consideration? Suppose that somebody is trying to position themselves as a future leader of the Southern Baptist Convention, for example, to become the president, and then you have the leader of the International Mission Board. You think that the president of the convention and the leader of the IMB would need to get along. And so, what about this idea that maybe you just need to, at least for the time being, not be publicly criticizing somebody that's you're going to be working closely with, and there's reasons why you might not want to. I mean, one reason is people are going to stop supporting the overall organization if they see that there's conflict among the heads. Another consideration is what if publicly criticizing this particular other leader could lead to you not even being elected, because people would consider you are not able to get along with other people. And then so maybe somebody says, well, I need to be electable. And that's also a consideration here. And therefore, I'm going to gloss over some of the errors. I'm going to say, you know what? I think that we can get along with Matthew Hall. I think we can get along with Chitwood. At least they might say that, but they might not completely believe it, because once they get elected, they want to change things. How do you evaluate that mindset?
Here's the problem. Given everything we know, right? In other words, apart from reading the person's mind, what you've just described is Al Mohler. I know that you meant to describe Tom Ascol, but given what we know from the outside looking in, then there is functionally no difference between Al Mohler and Tom Ascol, because that is exactly what Al Mohler has been doing, which has led to the problem that we're seeing, right? The problem with Mohler is that he, to be charitable, right? If we're not going to assume that he's intentionally conspiring to corrupt things, which is possible, but if we just say we don't know his motive, the most charitable reading is he's just trying to be democratic or diplomatic. I mean, he's trying to be a politician. He's trying to help move things along peacefully and keep the unity, right? That's the most charitable reading of Mohler. But look what that has resulted in. If the point of electing Ascol is to prevent Mohler, well, then Ascol's nomination or election is nullified if he's going to functionally be another Mohler. And that's this specific case. But let's back up. In principle, I'm with old Mohler, right? So the reason Mohler is so popular, the reason Mohler has the reputation that he has, is because of what he did in the conservative resurgence, specifically at Southern Baptist Seminary, in kicking out the liberals, in taking a hardline stand against leftism in theology and in sociology. And the way he himself described that was he compared it to turning around an aircraft carrier. And he said that an aircraft carrier can be turned slowly, gradually, so that no one who's on the aircraft carrier knows that it's turning. And it can do a whole 180, but it takes a really, really long time for that to happen. Or an aircraft carrier can turn almost on a dime, but everyone on board is going to know what happened, and some of the stuff on top is going to go flying off. Some of the really valuable stuff. But if it needs to do it, it can do it. And Mohler's own description of conservatism versus leftism is that an institution like a seminary cannot turn conservative incrementally over time. It can turn left incrementally over time. And that's the way leftism always works. It goes incrementally over time, little by little, moderation by moderation. But according to Al Mohler, the only way an institution like a seminary can turn conservative, can turn towards truth and righteousness and goodness and holiness and justice, is by doing so all at once, on a dime, and allowing everything to fly off if necessary. So I'm with Mohler on that. If we're going to turn the SBC around, or any given institution within the SBC around, it can't be gradual. Moderation favors leftism. Moderation favors error. The only way to move successfully in the direction of the truth is to do so without moderation.
You can see the reasons for why that would have to be so. If somebody is willing to position themselves in an institution where they know that the rest of the institution is teaching false things, and they're willing to keep quiet about the truth just so that they can not lose their job for a while and then hopefully come to dominate sometime in the future, that's a vain hope. Because, I mean, the things that you had to do to keep your job are the things you're going to have to continue doing to continue keeping your job. So I understand the logic behind this idea that you really cannot drift into the truth. You have to veer into the truth. And the way that I would be thinking about it if I were a seminary professor right now is, if me speaking the truth on these key issues, these essentials, is going to get me fired, then I'm in the wrong organization. And that's how you know that you're in the wrong organization. And that's what I think these career moderists and institutionalists are ignoring, is they're not asking themselves that question. Am I even in the right institution?
And I think they're probably afraid, because the answer means that they then lose the superstructure of what they've built their lives around. And I understand that. I really do. And I sympathize with it. But that the fact that it's hard, the fact that it comes with a lot of really difficult realizations and a lot of really difficult life changes, doesn't make it any less right.
And I'd also have to point out that you don't actually know the outcome if you choose to fight the battle. You
That's
you
right.
really don't. If you're, at Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, or if you're at Southern. I mean, some of these people, like Tom Rush or Russell Fuller, I mean, they didn't know what was going to happen when they spoke out, and look at the impact that they're having. And that's the kind of decision that, I'm sure that they had a hard time sleeping at night until they made that decision. And I'm so glad for their own souls that they did. And it makes such a difference for everybody else looking at the situation, because it's just so much more clear now that they've spoken out. And that's, probably going to cost them a lot. But it's a investment in their eternal reward. And we're grateful for them for doing that. And so we would call people like Tom Ascol or Albert Mohler or whoever you may be, people that are criticizing Jacob and saying, no, you can't say that because we need to win. Think about what a hero it takes to tell the truth, even if you don't know what the cost is going to be.
And
Do
think
you want to be
about
like
what you
those
mean by
men?
winning, right?
Yeah.
If winning means settling for what we have now or worse, have you really won anything? What does it profit a man to gain the whole world and to lose his soul? Think about what you're actually going to achieve. Think about what you're actually going to win. That are you just after a title? Are you just after a status? Or are you after the truth? Are you after actual righteousness?
The last couple of days, we've heard the announcement from Tom Ascol that they're going to be starting a ministry training program. And what's cool is that people like Jacob Brunton, who criticized Tom Ascol, in very good conscience, they can now say, yes, good job, Tom Ascol. Go ahead and do that. That's going to be good. We want you to do that. You should get as many students as possible, and you should replace Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. You should take their professors when they get fired for being too conservative. You should take their students. You should do a better job, do it with integrity. And Jacob can say that in good conscience, because he's just telling Tom, follow standards, follow objective standards. And that's all we're asking. That's all we've ever been asking.
So how does this all come home? How does this all relate to our everyday lives, our every week lives? And I think one of the big ways that it does is that we don't all have relationships, whether formal or informal, with guys like Tom Ascol or Doug Wilson or these other conservative leaders. But we do have relationships with our pastors, who presumably are somewhat of conservative leaders in our own lives. And we might have these same struggles with them in terms of, are they helping enemies within our church or others? Maybe Jamar Tisby, maybe they're helping people pretend that they're not false teachers. Maybe they're promoting Jamar Tisby's books or some, or they're at least trying to cover for people like Jamar Tisby, saying, no, Jamar Tisby doesn't mean that, or Tobiti Anabwile isn't that bad. Are they covering? And maybe you're dealing with that, and we want to help you see through our example how to address that with your pastor, and how to explain why that's dangerous, why that's sacrificing the good for the sake of the evil, why it's sacrificing truth for the sake of falsehood.
So go ahead and send us an email. You can email Jacob at christianintellectual.com or Cody at christianintellectual.com. And thank you for watching the video today. If you'd like to get access to our extra patron-only videos, you can find that at patreon.com/FTNCI. God bless and good premises to you.